Hello, internet fans. It's your old pal Rottin Roger DeMarco here from 3bproductionco.com. In this video, we're going to be talking about my top 5 horror films from 1981. This was a very tough year for me, so I'm going to do my best to tell you about my top 5. Hopefully you agree with some of them. If you do, if you don't, let me know your top 5 in the comments. But let's get this show on the road, shall we? My number 5 horror film from 1981 is Gary Sherman's Dead and Buried. Holy crap, I put off seeing this movie for so long. I don't know what it was. I saw the cover art a million times with like the statue sticking out of the ground or whatever, and I just wasn't ever sold on it. And then one day I found a copy of it, picked it up, and the movie blew my mind. And so it deserves a spot in this top 5 because this is a wild movie where you have this sheriff of this small town and he starts to suspect that things aren't exactly as they seem. There are people who go missing or are murdered, and then they show up in this town acting completely different. This movie's all about this police officer's journey of trying to find out exactly what's going on in his town. And it's a slasher, but it's got a lot of style, and it's got a lot of weird things going on in it. I don't want to spoil it for the people who haven't seen it, so my synopsis is going to be that. It's going to be very vague, but trust me when I say that you need to see this movie, Dead and Buried. It blew me away, and it earned a spot in my top 5 for 1981. But 1981 is arguably one of the best years for the horror film. So my list is all over the place, guys. That is my number 5 horror film for 1981, Dead and Buried. My number 4 horror film from 1981 is Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, aka Seven Doors of Death, or whatever weird title the Italians slapped on it over and over again. I saw this movie when I was around 14, did not know what to expect, and this is another one of those movies that completely caught me off guard and blew me away. You have a family purchase a house, they're renovating this house, and inside of this house is the gateway to hell. Starts out with a lot of weird things, a lot of accidents, tarantulas eating someone to death, really weird Italian horror stuff. And then we get to the finale of the film, and then it becomes a zombie film, where I kind of talked about this in my Dead Pit review, where the movie is not a zombie film until the final act, something like that. It's a weird Italian horror film that has some of the best gore gags you'll ever see in your life, and it made an impact on me at a very early age, and it's hard for me to let go. So as far as films in 1981 go, this one had to make the cut because it's so influential to me in my life. And every chance I get, I try to push this movie off on anyone who will take it and borrow it and sit through it and see how they feel about it. So I had to put it in my list. So that's why Lucio Fulci's The Beyond is my number 4 horror film for 1981. Moving on. No, I couldn't talk about 1981 without this film. Number 3 horror film for 1981 is Steve Miner's Friday the 13th Part 2. This is where the franchise starts becoming a franchise, if you will. We get Sackhead Jason. What else can be said about this movie that hasn't been said by a billion other people on the internet? It's awesome. Amy Steele kicks ass. We have Steve Dash / Warrington Gillette as Jason. We get the Packanack Lodge. We get the dude in the wheelchair. We get the girl with the brown silk underwear spraying perfume on her hoo-ha. Lots of weird things in this movie. We all know about it. We've all seen it. Friday the 13th Part 2 is my number 3 horror film for 1981. Moving on to number 2. Another movie that I struggled with this because this could very easily be my number 1 of this year. Of course, I'm talking about John Landis's American Werewolf in London. This movie is beyond influential for me. This has, bar none, some of the greatest practical effects ever put to film. This has an excellent story. Again, what can be said about this movie that hasn't been said a million times? The characters are great. The effects are great. The story is so fucking good and sad and exciting and funny and all of these things that should be in every movie. John Landis just blows you away with this movie. Yes, it's a werewolf movie, and we talked about this, my wife and I talked about this recently, that it's a werewolf film where the climax is sort of anticlimactic. We get a lot of build, and then we get to see this werewolf for a split second, but it's not necessarily about the werewolf. It's about the connection of the human characters. American Werewolf in London is a classic, and if you haven't seen it, you should really sort your fucking life out, mate. You should do that. You should see this movie. And that's why John Landis's American Werewolf in London is my number 2 horror film from 1981, because it's so good. It's probably the closest thing to a perfect film that I could think of off the top of my head. And moving on to my number 1 horror film of 1981. I gotta say, before I say the title of the film, this movie is part of a franchise. This movie is often overlooked because the later entries in the franchise take the series in a completely different direction and create icons, create catchphrases, create all of these wonderful things. But this first film is so gnarly to me, holds such a close place in my heart. And I know that there are legions of people who believe that this movie is overrated. People think that this movie just is not that good, and I disagree. We can all agree to disagree, but this is my list, and this is my personal favorite film from that year. And that, of course, is Sam Raimi's Evil Dead. I love everything about this movie. I could talk about this movie forever. Eventually, I'll just do a review on it, but you know the film. You know the backstory. Everybody knows this film. If you haven't seen it, by some weird chance, if you're new, getting into horror, and you're looking for things to check out, I can't say enough good things about Evil Dead. This is from a whole different era. It might be 1981, but it feels very much like a mid-70s, gross, violent, wild film. It feels just different from everything that has come before it and that came after it. Sam Raimi captured something so visceral and so fun and off the wall when he made this movie. The effects are not that great. There's some stuff that's pretty rough. You got Tom Sullivan doing stop motion animation and things like that, which has a certain charm to it. But really, this is a group of people doing whatever it takes to make a movie. And there are some things in this film that are genuinely frightening. And I can't say enough good things about the original Evil Dead. So, again, in some off chance that you haven't seen the movie, please find a way to see the original Evil Dead and see if you appreciate it as much as I do. But enough rambling. That was my top 5 list for horror films of 1981. I gotta say, again, this was a super hard year to deal with because there were so many great films, and I have a couple of honorable mentions. Again, I love all of these movies, but this list was so tough. I mean, you have The Prowler, you have My Bloody Valentine, you've got The Howling, The Burning, Halloween 2, which is one of my all-time favorite films, Tobe Hooper's Funhouse. It was just a great year for horror, and that's what makes these lists so great, is because undoubtedly we're going to have some different tastes, and we're going to have, you're going to think something else was way better than something on my list. So let me know in the comments what movies that you really like from 1981, because I am 100% intrigued. I'm curious. I want to know what it is that you dig from that year in horror. So that being said, I think I've talked long enough. Thank you guys for watching the video, but I suppose I should probably get going because after all, There's a lot of movies out there, and somebody's got to watch them, so why not me, right? Oh, my knees are killing me.